All right, y'all. Let's see how far we can get. Let's see how far we can get today. Today in this recording, I mean, because there's a lot. There's a lot on this list. I looked through and there's a lot that are already scored, but there's a lot on this list, man. All right. Candidate for Goddess. This was a really boring, really confusing show that was on Adult Swim way back in the day. I didn't get it. Nobody seemed to. I've never heard anyone say anything good about this show. I don't know why the fuck it was on Adult Swim, but it was on the original run. I don't remember shit about it. I'd probably give it I don't know, a 3. I don't know how bad it is. Black Lagoon, a really solid, fun action show with really memorable characters and a narrative that was a little hit and miss. I think the anime was probably slower than it should have been on getting its way through the arcs and stuff. It wasn't the best production that Madhouse has ever put together, but it's overall solid, and I enjoyed it a lot. I think I gave it an 8 back then. I'd probably give it a 7 now, because I'm not as interested in just fun, violent, wacky times. Or if I was, I'd want it to be better produced and tighter in construction, but Black Lagoon was still a good time. Higurashi, I really, really like Higurashi. It's got one of the most interesting narrative conceits ever. The entire idea of the story is fucking crazy, because it's basically a horror story that keeps resetting itself and going back to the beginning and telling a different version of the same story. And you're not really sure why until the second season, when shit really opens up and gets really interesting. And the characters are pretty lovable and memorable as the show goes on, and you sort of build a relationship with them. Then I think it becomes more and more meaningful. The second season is obviously when shit really gets interesting, though I would say that the character building is stronger in season 1, and then the plot is stronger in season 2, but overall it's a great show. I'd probably give it an 8 out of 10. Generator Gull, this is a kind of fun 90s action comedy romp that develops more of a serious story as it goes. That is okay. Everything about it's just kind of okay. I did a DVD Tuesdays about this show and talked about it, but I'd probably give it a 6. It's nothing to write home about, but it's entertaining enough, especially if you just really want a taste of some 90s character style and shit like that. Kacho Oji, Legend of Black Heaven. I also did a DVD Tuesdays on this. One of the older main characters in anime, exploring his having formerly been a rock star and kind of coming to grips with the fact that he's a fucking middle-aged man now. It's very uneven, but it's very much worth watching. I'd give it a 6 or a 7. The ending is really strong, but the mid part of the show is extremely iffy. The Soul Taker, one of the most aesthetically brilliant shows ever made. It was Shinbo going the farthest he's ever gone with this aesthetic. Really just taking the reins and going crazy with it. It's got a weird fucking story that doesn't really matter. It's mostly about the aesthetics and the sometimes beautiful animation, particularly in the early episodes. It's just a really good time. I don't think it's nothing special narratively, and I don't even know if it needed to be a whole 13 episode show. It could have just been a weird fucking OVA and probably made about the same amount of the point. So I'd probably give it a 7. And that's a 7 sheer aesthetic strength 7. It's just because it looks that fucking cool that I'd give it that score. Ipatsu Kiki Musume, if I remember correctly, this is another 5-minute episode show. Yeah, 3 minutes. I remember this not even being that funny. I think I watched all of it just because it was so short. I'd probably give it a 4 or a 5. Obviously it's funny enough to finish, but not enough to be memorable. This one, what the fuck was the English title of this? Soul Hunter. This is one, I don't even know. I think I bought this on DVD at some point, and I remember watching the whole show and never really getting it. I think this is one of those where it condensed a much longer manga or something, and I don't know. I remember the narrative being really weird and going all over the place and having weird time skips, or half the show is different from the other half. I really don't remember. It's been a fucking eternity. I'm gonna assume it's a show I'd give 5 because I didn't even like it as a kid, but maybe there was something to it I didn't recognize. I have no fucking idea. I don't remember anything about it. Neo Rangga. This is one that I think is one of the weirdest, most interesting shows that is out there. It came out in the late 90s. It's one of the first Sho Aikawa things, and his stuff's always fucking weird. And this is probably my favorite of his writing, but like, it's about these 3 girls who inherit a gigantic kaiju, and then it's like just weird everyday life adventures, but like often with like socio-political commentary. Sometimes the show is incredibly violent, and sometimes it's a goofy comedy, and it's just really all over the place. But most of it's pretty interesting, and like I remember the first time I tried to watch it, I got really confused about 15 episodes in and just gave up because I just didn't get it. And then when I came into it like with different expectations, like knowing it was going to be weird, I appreciated it more. But the last 10 episodes I remember sucking ass. Like, I really hated the way the show wraps up. I hated the plot that it pulls out of its ass at the end. And yeah, it's 48 episodes, but they're all half length, so it's really more like a 26 episode show. But like, the last part of it was really dumb. So yeah, like, I want to say it's a great show just with a shitty ending, but it's also fucking weird. So I'd probably give it like a 6 or a 7, depending on how much it pisses me off if I watch it again. Zero no Tsukaima. This is a show I actually am surprised by how okay it is. Because, like, I watched this show when it first came out, and it was during the big tsundere boom, and it got a lot of shit for being a tsundere show. Like, you know, Louise is like a hardcore bitch. She's always beating up the main character guy and stuff, and like never admitting her feelings. And the show's kind of infamous for the fact, especially in the later seasons, that the characters will constantly be like confessing to one another, but then something will revert their relationship back to zero, essentially. But I think it's really funny. Like, the characters are pretty entertaining. I think the show's pretty self-aware about what it's doing. It doesn't feel nearly as stupid as a lot of the other shows that were coming out at the same time. And it has actually, like, a story. Because it's set in a fantasy world. It's an isekai show, but one where the main character... Man, people want to talk about, like, ReZero and how, like, oh, the main character is not really a hero. He just gets beat up on all the time. Man, you want to see the original of that? Zero no Tsukaima. This guy gets teleported to another world to become the lapdog of a fucking brat. I think he does eventually get some kind of superpower and save the day or something, but I don't fucking remember. Either way, you know, it's just it's a goofy, very raunchy, pseudo-harem comedy show, but like mostly it's a rom-com, and yeah, I think the characters are pretty endearing, and it's a pretty fun show. I'd give it like a 7. I never watched the other seasons. I was like halfway through season 2, and I just kind of lost interest and forgot about it, so obviously not that special. Gag Manga Biori. This is another one of the early 5-minute episode adaptations, but this one's like really weird. Like, every episode is just completely random stuff. Like, there's no like characters or anything. It's just weird random gag comedy. It's very hit or miss. So again, I'd probably give it a 6 like I would with most of those shows. Welcome to the NHK, another one that was one of my favorite anime for a little while. Very relatable. If you've ever been a hikikomori, if you've ever been a shut-in, if you've ever had mental health issues, you'll probably relate to this show. I think the novel is stronger. I talked about this extensively in the Old Ass Anime cast, but like, the anime is still really good, though it's kind of uneven in places. I'd probably give it like a 7 or an 8. It really depends. I'm gonna say an 8, because I doubt that it would offend me that much in any part, but like, I do think that it has a lot of issues that only become apparent as you rewatch it, because initially you're so enamored with like the concept and like just the idea of it. And like the moments that are really great, but there's a lot of it that's kind of slow and plotting, and like the artwork's not very good. Nadia, The Secret of Blue Water. This is kind of a similar story to Escaflowne and Karekano, where this is a show that starts off really strong, and it's a really great adventure series. Like, the first like 26 episodes are a really fucking solid adventure series. It has a lot in common with like Eureka 7, where it's like a young boy who's kind of coming of age, and he's falling in love with this mysterious girl who kind of wants nothing to do with him and has her own story going on, but they sort of develop some kinship together as they're on this adventure with these older characters. And I don't think it's as solid as Eureka 7, though it is very well directed and constructed. It feels very classic and old school. It's inspired by 50,000 Leagues Under the Sea, though it takes a lot of liberties with it. I think this show was originally going to be a World Masterpiece Theater show, because Hayao Miyazaki created the concept of this show, and he just kind of gave it to Gainax and let them do it. But Nadia hits a huge snag at a certain point, because like the last 2 episodes are good and are a good ending, but there's about 10 episodes before that they had to outsource to another studio, and they are fucking horrible. Like, the characters all completely fall apart, become unlikable pieces of shit. The story just completely gets run into the ground, and it's really bad. Now, I want to rewatch this show and just skip those episodes and see if this is actually a great 26 episode series with like a 13 episode pile of shit in the middle of it. Even though there's like at least one episode in that middle section that's actually pretty good, but like it's not worth seeing that whole thing. Like, it really drags the show down. So like, I think at the time I gave it like a 6 because I was so disappointed with it, but I think maybe if I was willing to look past that part, or like at least knew what I was getting myself into, I might score it higher. It might be like a 7 or an 8, because it is a really solid show up to that point. Afro Samurai is a blaxploitation samurai flick thing that's like meant to be. It's like Wu-Tang Clan was inspired by like kung fu movies, and then somehow kung fu movies got inspired by Wu-Tang Clan, and that's like the full circle that Afro Samurai completes. The story's not that interesting. The artwork is really beautiful. There's some great action and gore, but like, I was never that into the fight choreography. Like, I felt like the action was lacking compared to what I wanted it to be. Even though it looks really good, it just didn't feel like the kind of action I really hoped for. And the story's not that interesting. I'd probably give it like a 5. Black Lagoon: The Second Barrage feel the same way as the first season. Asate no Hoko. This is one I don't remember as much about this, other than that I thought it was really solid. But it's kind of a very low key drama where there's a little girl and an older woman who end up switching ages. Like, the older woman suddenly becomes a little girl, and the little girl becomes an older woman, and this has really devastating effects on both of their social relationships. Obviously, they're put into these different shoes that they're not really fit to accommodate. In the little girl's case, she's thrust into the scary world of adults while not being mentally equipped to deal with it. And in the older girl's case, it kind of allows her to like escape a lot of those responsibilities and take a deeper look at herself and like realize what she's become. It's an interesting drama series that wraps up nicely, and it's just good. Like, it's a good show. I'd probably give it like an 8. I think that's what I gave it back then. I don't see any reason. It's fairly slow, and it's not super memorable, but it's just well written and constructed. As I understand it, the manga goes on a lot longer and gets like weird, but I don't know anything about that. Code Geass Season 1. Really fucking entertaining show. Code Geass is a roller coaster ride through all kinds of fucking weird stuff. It simultaneously is like this epic war drama that's really compelling and has these great tactical battles, and Lelouch is a really interesting character with really interesting like motivations and stuff. There's lots of interesting dynamics between characters. But then at the same time, it's like a stupid high school comedy show sometimes, and some of the stuff that happens is just so out of left field and dumb that it makes the whole thing feel stupid. So like, it's almost this weird combination of like high and low art. But unlike I want to put it in the vein of something like Kill La Kill, or like something like that. It has that feel to it, but it feels so much less smart than that show, where like Kill La Kill is able to be more self-aware and make fun of itself a little bit more, and like, it doesn't affect the story that it's stupid, because it kind of incorporates the stupidity into the story. Code Geass, sometimes you're just like, why can't you just be good? You know? So like, yeah, it's a weird mixed bag. And I never finished season 2, which is even more of a crazy mixed bag, from what I understand. But yeah, season 1, I'd probably give it like a 7 or an 8 out of 10. Like, it's a very compelling and interesting show and entertaining. It just has a lot of weird flaws that that like it's not even, you're not even sure why the show did that. Hataraki Man. This is a workplace comedy. I think it has shorter episodes, and it's only 11 episodes. No, not shorter, but it was a Noitami show with 11 episodes, and from Moyoko Ano, the original manga creator. It's a pretty entertaining, just sort of slice of life comedy show about being an office lady and how it's really fucking stressful. It's just basically about this woman working really hard, getting stressed out, going to the spa, rinse and repeat. It's a little repetitive, but it's charming and entertaining. It's worth a go through. I'd probably give it like a strong 6 to a light 7. I don't know which one I'd give it if I rewatched it, but it's worthwhile. Red Garden is one of the weirder fucking shows out there. This is like a horror drama that's heavily inspired by Western TV shows, particularly like what's his fucking name? Joss Whedon. Like, it's very Buffy the Vampire Slayer inspired. So it's got that odd mix of like, there's a couple of musical scenes in the show, like characters will just burst out singing for no reason. There's like comedy elements, but it's mostly like a interpersonal drama with a strong horror undercurrent about these 4 girls who have to like fight zombie vampires or something while dealing with their everyday drama, and it builds into like a really weird direction. It has a crazy ass ending that's pretty fucking cool. Red Garden's a weird one. Like, I am really glad I watched it, and I definitely recommend it because it's so odd, but I don't know if it's like a great show, so I'd probably give it like a 7. Hitohira. This was a slice of life drama from the late 2000s that's sort of in the same vein as stuff like Manabi Straight and even Hidamari Sketch, which is right under it, but it's a lot more melodramatic than most. Like, this one feels a little bit, it feels kind of like a Yuri baiting girls in high school club kind of show, except that it's way more shoujo-y than most. I guess it's closest to Marimite, but like it gets really melodramatic, and it's somewhat entertaining, but I think the melodrama goes a little too far for me. Like, it's a little too fucking much, a little too emotional, a little too much crying for me, I guess. But it's overall a pretty good show with some nice like coming of age messages. It's just that there's so many better coming of age shows, especially like for me, So like, yeah, I'd say it's probably like a 6 out of 10. Hidamari Sketch is legit one of my favorite shows. It's probably like my favorite straight up slice of life borderline Iyashikei show, though it's a lot funnier than most Iyashikei. It's just a quaint school comedy show with a really weird aesthetic because it's a Shaft series, and so like the visuals kind of get topsy-turvy and odd at times, but it's super comfy. The main cast is really fun and relatable and lovable, and I could watch them forever. Which is good because there's 1,000 seasons of this show. I'll probably give it, like, I don't know, like, season 2 is stronger than season 1, and I don't know if season 1, like, holds up as well as I remember it. Like, I could see giving it either an 8 or a 9, I'm not sure which. Depends on if I think it holds up as well as my memories. Tokyo Majin Genpucho To. This is just a pretty standard, like, action fucking like shonen thing, like a more plot driven one. It almost feels like an anime that's based on a video game, even though it's not. But yeah, it's like dudes fighting monster like zombies or demons or whatever, and it's got like kind of a punk atmosphere, like attitude to it. Like the characters are like, yeah, we're gonna beat the shit out of these fucking monsters and stuff, and like it's a little edgy basically, but it's just very teenage. Like, even when I watched it in like 2007, I felt like I was kind of growing out of this kind of show that I really would have liked in my early teens. And at this point, I've probably long grown out of it. But I remember it being pretty well directed and having some nice animation at times. So it's not bad. I'd probably give it like a strong 5 light 6 if I watched it today. Lucky Star is another one of my favorite shows. One of my favorite slice of life comedies. One of my favorite cute girl shows. It just has such a distinctive atmosphere and like attitude to it. Like, the music and animation are both really on point, and the sort of flow of episodes, the things that it's willing to get interested in are interesting. And I would say it's, to me it's like Azumanga Daioh but fleshed out. Like that show I could never get truly into because I feel like the characters are kind of flat and there's not that much that happens. Like there's not much variety in the show, and that's a problem I have with a lot of cute girl high school shows. Is like they're too much at school. There's too much like of the same shit. Lucky Star branches out a little bit more and it explores almost fetishistically like every aspect of these girls' lives, and that makes it more interesting. It doesn't go as far narratively as like K-On! Or Hitomori Sketch does, but it's still a really fun show and I like it a lot. So I'd probably give it a 9. I doubt I would lower my score. Higurashi season 2, I feel I already talked about it when I talked about season 1. Darker Than Black. I have no idea what I'd think of this show if I watched it now. The first time I like watched some of this show, like while it was airing, I think I'd seen half of it, and it's interesting because it has 2 episode arcs. The whole show is 2 episode arcs, each of which is okay. None of them individually is like a massively standout piece of work. But when I rewatched, like I started from the beginning and watched all the way through, and there's definitely like lots of really strong directing in there, like little call forwards and stuff, like stuff you wouldn't catch on the first time around necessarily. That, or I just wasn't paying attention the first time I watched it, which is equally likely. But like it's pretty all right. Like I thought it was an entertaining action show. It kind of has the 26 episode show problem again, but not as badly as some of the others. I'd probably give it like a 7 if I finished it today, assuming it's as good as I remember. If I watched it and it was actually really lame, I'd probably give it like a 5 or a 6, but I don't remember how good it is overall. True Tears. This is like the first PA Works show. I think it was like the first one they did entirely by themselves. And it was really well produced, and like it's a love triangle show where, there's a definitive winner and loser. And depending on how you felt about the characters, this show really tore people apart. I, of course, was into the Manic Pixie Dream Girl character, and the show is pretty harsh on her, so, like, I got really emotionally affected by it. But, I don't know. I don't know if the show holds up. I really don't. Like, I feel like I was emotionally invested because of who I was at the time, but that like it had nothing to do with how good the show is. It's probably pretty mediocre. I'd probably give it like a strong 5 light 6 if I watched it now, if I could even stomach the level of melodrama that it has, which is doubtful. Denno Coil. This is a really interesting like cyberpunk show that I never got around to talking about when I was covering like all the cyberpunk shows years ago. But it's a show where basically Google Glass and augmented reality is like the norm. Everyone wears like these goggles that let them see an augmented layer of reality, and the show just kind of explores and plays around with that. It's another one that, again, falls into the 26 episode problem where when it develops a story in the later part of the show, I felt like it got less interesting, though I think it does have a good ending. But there's a midsection of like weird one-off episode stories that are fucking hilarious and great. There's one episode where everyone like develops living beards and the beards go to war. It's fucking weird and it's really cool. The animation and style of this is incredible. It was directed by Mitsuo Iso, who's one of the most famous animators of all time. And after doing this show, which was not successful, he like blinked off the map, and he very rarely appears anymore. But yeah, it was a really solid show. Like I've heard I know some people who've like watched this more recently. Devu was like really not into it, and I remember having problems with it, but overall thinking it was just like really solidly structured and written. I'm probably gonna give it an 8. Like that seems likely to me, going by my memories, but I'd have to see it again to know how I really feel. Mononoke. This is one of the most experimental and fascinating to watch shows on the market. It was first of all, the visuals are totally fucking like Gankutsuo level of trippy and experimental, but it's basically 4 small arcs of Japanese horror, like 2 or 3 episode arcs of this guy who's the medicine seller will show up somewhere, and basically there's some kind of haunting going on, and he has to first like identify the nature of the haunting and like figure out like why it's happening, and then he can exorcise the demon, but not without a cost. And like he's a very like almost Ryuk-esque character of like he's not involved in this, he's just here to do his job, and like he doesn't really care about what happens to the humans who he's trying to help, you know? He's sort of morally ambiguous, as are everyone else in the stories. And yeah, it's creepy and unsettling, even though the main thrust of it is not so much just the horror, but like the psychological element of like why this is happening. Really good. Like, I'm not into suspense thrillers or horror, and I still think this is a fantastic show. So I'd probably give it an 8 out of 10. Bakano. This is one that was one of my favorites for a really long time because I loved the cast of highly eccentric, weird characters who are really fun to watch, most of whom are immortal, so the show gets incredibly violent. It's got this weird anachronic storytelling where they basically adapted 4 novels at once and just mixed them up in a blender so that they would all have the same like climax at the same time. It's really fun to like piece together what's going on, following all these characters and shit, beautifully animated and acted and scored. So yeah, like the production is completely on point, and it's really solid. I don't think I would love it as much now as I did back then because it's not like the plot is super deep or anything, and like I probably wouldn't buy into the cult of personality of every character as much as I did back then. But still, I can't see giving this less than an 8. It's still a really fucking fun show, and really good. What the fuck is Pokemon Hoso Kyoku? Is this the random specials? Yeah, Pokemon Chronicles. This is just like a bunch of random Pokemon TV specials. I'm sure they're fine. 6, why not? Potamayo. This was a another comedy, like a rom-com show where it's like another love polygon thing going on, except it's also got these tiny little adorable cute things that can only say their own name, and even then they can't say the entire name because they run out of breath halfway through. It's like heart-stoppingly cute, but like overall is still like a pretty standard high school rom-com show. So like I can't see giving it more than a 6 at the absolute most. But you know, it's the kind of show that I've seen 1,000 of, so I'm kind of harsh on it. Minami K is another like young characters high schoolish rom-com. Well, not rom-com, just like a comedy show. But like it's about 3 sisters, one in elementary school, one in middle school, one in high school, all of their friends, all of their interactions. So it breaks away from school a lot more than most. And even when it does go to school, it's going to 3 different strata of school, so like it can explore different ideas and stuff, and like each character kind of has their own like side narratives. It's pretty fucking entertaining. I remember really thinking it was hilarious for the first season. I know that they made like 4 seasons, and the other ones were by different studios, and some people really hated the way it went later on. I never bothered with them, so I'd probably give Minami K a 7 if it's as funny as I remember. Spice and Wolf. This is a really interesting and solid show about economics in like a feudal like era setting. Like the main character is a fucking wheat trader who like drives around a cart through like an old-timey I want to say 1800s era place, and like he ends up with a goddess of the grain, a wolf goddess who joins him on his journey because she's not really needed anymore where she was at, and so she takes a human form and goes with him, and there's sort of this sexual romantic tension between the two of them as the show goes along. It's very relaxed and just kind of explores these different economic situations that the main character finds himself in. Occasionally gets dramatic. It's got a lot of interesting ideas, and Holo is everyone's waifu. She's one of the best waifus out there, so unsurprisingly, it's a pretty popular show for that reason alone. I'd probably give it an 8 as I did back then. I can't see giving it like more or less than that. So yeah. Bamboo Blade is a sports anime about cute girls. It's one of the first examples, like it kind of bridges a gap, I think, between 2 different eras, because back in the 90s there were lots of sports shows about girls, even in like the 70s when you go like Aim for the Ace and shit. Like there used to be girl sports shows like Princess Nine and stuff like that were just like, you know, like a regular sports narrative. They weren't like trying to be cute girl shows. They were just sports shows about girls. And now we get sport shows about girls, but they're all cutesy. They're all like moe shit. And I think Bamboo Blade was like the midpoint between those, where like it clearly has moe appeal, but the style of the narrative is more of a standard sports narrative. And like the characters aren't overly cutesy. Some of them have like boyfriends, and there's like male characters in the story. It's not like all girls the way it would be now. Um, so like yeah, it's like at a weird midpoint between those two, and it's pretty good. I don't think it's the best sports narrative. It has some pretty entertaining and memorable characters. I was pretty into the main character at the time the show aired. But like yeah, it's not exceptional, but I'd probably give it a 7. It's a really fun time. It's worth a shot. And then we get Ultimate Survivor Kaiji. Kaiji is the gambling anime with a really unique concept. Basically, the main character finds himself in an assload of debt, and he has to go into like these black market gambling circuits to try to get it back. But the gambling is all in made up games that are super fucking weird and really well thought out that the manga author crafted. And it's all this psychological battle through the darkest parts of humanity. It's pretty fucked up sometimes, and it's really gripping, sometimes depressing and hard to watch, but like always entertaining, and it is constantly cliffhangering you. So like you can't watch the show anything less than all at once. Like trying to stop in the middle is torture. You gotta just marathon the fucking thing. And it's really fucking good. Again, this is what I was saying before, that like anime doesn't have a lot of thrillers, but when it does, they're usually really fucking solid, and Kaiji's a great example of that. I would probably give it a solid 8, if not a 9. But you know, I'd have to rewatch it to know for sure. And that about wraps up this episode. I think I made it through like 30 or 40 shows that time, so I did much better than usual. I think we're going to start moving along at a better pace now. Thank God.